want to face off with the U.S. president in the next election. How the new names and familiar faces did. As Newsroom pushes ahead, stay with us. Another day, another high-level resignation at the Trump White House. This time, the U.S. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke set to step down at the end of the year. Zinke has faced multiple ethics investigations and was reportedly under pressure to resign. In fact, the Washington Post reports Zinke was given an ultimatum: leave by the end of the year or be fired. CNN's Boris Sanchez picks up the story from Washington.
We can tell you that the White House was closely watching Ryan Zinke's legal situation amid his departure as the Secretary of the Interior. Zinke's been accused of misusing agency resources to advance his own personal finances. There are more than 15 different inquiries that were opened by the Inspector General of that agency into Zinke's behavior. Questions about his lavish spending on travel, whether his wife was using government vehicles, his involvement in a casino deal in Connecticut, and one that's now being investigated by the Department of Justice, this land deal that he struck in his home state of Montana with the head of Halliburton. Now, Zinke has denied all of the allegations against him. In a tweet, he justifies his departure by saying he didn't want to spend thousands of dollars to try to clear his name. He is a favorite target of Democrats who are relishing his departure, including the minority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer. He wrote on Twitter, quote, "Ryan Zinke was one of the most toxic members of the cabinet, and the way he treated our environment, our precious public lands, and the way he treated the government like it was his personal honeypot. The swamp cabinet will be a little less foul without him." We should note Saturday night was the congressional ball here at the White House, with President Trump greeting several members of his cabinet as well as members of Congress. Zinke was here on hand. There are reports out there that the White House forced him out. CNN still trying to confirm that. We can tell you that the administration certainly wanted to put some distance between yet another member of the president's cabinet with questionable ethical behavior and the White House. Boris Sanchez, CNN at the White House.
Boris, thank you. And Zinke is not the only one leaving the White House. He joins a big group of people who have either left or are in the process of leaving. You see all of the faces, all of the names right there from the Trump administration, and more could be coming. Here's what President Trump told 60 Minutes on CBS about this situation 2 months ago. Listen.
I think I have a great cabinet. There are some people that I'm not happy with.
Who are you not happy?
I don't want to say that. But
come on.
No, I don't want to say that. But I have some people that I'm not thrilled with, and I have other people that I'm beyond thrilled with.
Now to the issue of health care in the United States. The Affordable Care Act, better known as Obamacare, it is still the law of the land, despite being struck down by a federal judge on Friday as unconstitutional. The deadline to sign up for the ACA has now expired, except for a handful of states where the deadline is January 31st. President Trump welcomed the judge's controversial decision, as you'll hear here.
I believe we're going to get really good health care. Exciting things happened over the last 24 hours. And if everybody's smart, because we have a lot of Democrats here tonight, and I'm very happy about that, people don't realize it. I have a lot of friends who are Democrats. And we have Democrats here, and if the Republicans and the Democrats get together, we are going to end up with incredible health care, which is the way it should have been from day one, and it's going to happen.
The current president there, and we also heard from the former U.S. President Barack Obama, who was quick to reassure Americans that their health care was not going away because of this ruling. Mr. Obama posted a lengthy response on social media that you see here, telling those who depend upon Obamacare that the judge's decision, quote, changes nothing for now, at least. Let's bring in Stephen Erlanger now to talk more about this. Stephen, the chief diplomatic editor in Europe for the New York Times. Always a pleasure, Stephen, to have you on the show. So let's start with Obamacare, the law that was struck down by this federal judge and certainly has been hit in the kneecaps plenty of times since the U.S. president took office. Politically, the question, where does this put Democrats as far as campaigning toward 2020? And what does it mean for Republicans who are surely satisfied, optimistic about seeing this law struck down?
Well, I think everyone should take a breath, which is pretty much what Obama said. It's a very sweeping ruling. It's probably too sweeping to hold up. under appeal, and nothing will change in the meantime. It does give the Democrats an opportunity to work out a better deal, perhaps, with the Republicans in Congress. It's a way of showing a sort of bipartisanship. But I think, the issue of pre-existing conditions, all that has been very popular for the Democrats in the midterms. And any attempt to really get rid of Obamacare in all of its particularities would be very unpopular for the Republicans. So I think everybody has to be a bit careful, but the judge's ruling itself, I think, will be too sweeping to stand up.
It'll be interesting because Republicans may view health care differently than Democrats. The difference between is it a right or is it a privilege? So we'll have to see if the parties can come together on this. Let's talk about the changing of the guard. The Washington Post reporting that the U.S. Interior Secretary was given this ultimatum to leave by the end of the year or be fired. Here's the thing, Stephen. He reportedly wanted to stay on at least through his Christmas party, Zinke did, where he invited lobbyists, conservative activists, and even posed for a photo in front of a large polar bear wearing a Santa cap, despite being mired in investigations. What do you make of this situation where the White House is pushing him out?
Well, everybody loves Christmas. Everybody loves a good Christmas party. He's been a real embarrassment for the Trump administration. He has done environmentally some of what Trump really wants. My guess is that he'll be replaced by someone who's also very, very tough on all these efforts at conservation. But in terms of his personal behavior and all the investigations he's involved with and the money he's spent on his office and everything else, I think really, he just looks so out of touch with the people who are supposed to be Trump's base. So I think whether the White House pushed him out or not, it's probably good for Trump that he's going, because he's likely to be indicted down the road.
And continuing on the topic of the revolving door, the current Chief of Staff, General John Kelly, on his way out, the Director of Office and Management, budget, Mick Mulvaney, is on his way in, at least on a temporary basis. There's an interview, though, Stephen, from Mulvaney back from a debate that he took part in 2016 that's catching some attention, where he had a very specific description of his boss. Let's listen.
Yes, I'm supporting Donald Trump. I'm doing so as enthusiastically as I can, given the fact I think he's a terrible human being, but the choice on the other side is just as bad.
It is another case, Stephen, where words come back to haunt, and a president who has thin skin for criticism. What do you make of that statement and how it plays into Mulvaney taking this new role?
Well, Mulvaney was quite a conservative congressman from South Carolina, and he was speaking after the tapes came out about Trump's famous expression about how to treat women by grabbing their genitals. So I think he was responding to his constituency and saying what a lot of people who ended up voting for Trump felt, which was this was not a very nice thing to say. But it will haunt him. I mean, it's very hard working for Donald Trump, that's for sure. He's flighty. He runs by instinct. He changes his mind. He falls in love and out of love with people very, very quickly. So my understanding is that Mulvaney actually asked for the title of acting chief of staff, because when Trump gets tired of him, it'll be easier to go. Somebody's got to do the job. And he gets on with Trump. They play golf together. He's apparently well known for bringing lots of bright charts and graphs into the White House with him, which Trump likes. So let's see. Somebody has to try to discipline the White House. So why not Mr. Mulvaney?
The old saying, it's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. We'll see how this plays out. Stephen Erlinger live for us in Brussels, Belgium. Thank you for your time.
Thanks, George.
Around the world and in the United States, you are watching Newsroom. And still ahead, Brexit. It is turning into a major headache for Theresa May, the British Prime Minister. Still ahead, we'll discuss what's next for Ms. May after her own party triggers a confidence vote over her handling of Brexit. Plus, another country could soon follow Britain's lead, Italy. The budget battle with the EU is raising concerns that it may also try to leave the EU. We'll have details from Rome as CNN Newsroom continues. From coast to coast across the United States, good morning to you, and live around the world, good day to you. Thank you for watching CNN Newsroom live from Atlanta. I'm George Howell with the headlines we're following for you. This hour, a Guatemalan consul says the father of this migrant girl who died in U.S. Border Patrol custody has no complaints about her treatment. But Jacqueline Calmaquin's family still wants a thorough investigation into what happened. They add she was not suffering from a lack of food or water when she was taken into custody. Delegates from nearly 200 nations, including the United States, they've reached a deal to put the Paris Climate Accord into action. But they agree on rules to encourage countries to abandon dirty sources of energy like coal and oil and natural gas, and to monitor each other's progress. The Interior Secretary, Ryan Zinke, is leaving the White House. Zinke has faced multiple ethics investigations. He says that he can't justify spending thousands of dollars to defend himself against what he calls false allegations. The U.S. president tweeted a replacement will be announced next week. It's been more than 5 weeks since the deadliest wildfire to take place in California history. You see these images from Paradise, California. Evacuation orders have finally been lifted, allowing residents there to return to whatever is left there of their homes. Search crews finished looking through the area, scouring that area, but the cause of the fire, it is still under investigation. Now to the United Kingdom and Brexit. The British Prime Minister is headed into the Christmas holidays, perhaps feeling a bit less cheerful than usual. One of her top ministers acknowledged it's been, quote, a pretty tough week for Brexit. It's been a pretty tough week for the Prime Minister. To recap, her week started by pulling a crucial Brexit vote in Parliament because of the near certainty that her unpopular plan would go down in flames.
We will therefore defer the vote scheduled for tomorrow and not proceed to divide the House at this time.
And on Wednesday, hardliners in her own party, they staged a revolt, triggering a no-confidence vote. May survived that vote, but was made very keenly aware of 1/3 of her MPs that had turned against her.
I'm pleased to have received the backing of my colleagues in tonight's ballot. Whilst I'm grateful for that support, a significant number of colleagues did cast a vote against me, and I've listened to what they said. Following this ballot, we now need to get on with the job of delivering Brexit for the British people and building a better future for this country.
And after that, May immediately went to Brussels to enlist the EU's help to try to save her Brexit deal. She didn't get it, but she tried to stay optimistic. Listen.
I note that there has been reporting that the EU is not willing to consider any further clarification. The EU is clear, as I am, that if we are going to leave with the deal, this is it. But my discussions with colleagues today have shown that further clarification and discussion following the Council's conclusions is, in fact, possible.
That was the week that was, and where do things go next? Let's bring in Quentin Peel to talk about this. Peel, an associate fellow in the Europe program at the London think tank Chatham House, also a commentator for the Financial Times, live for us in our London bureau. A pleasure to have you on the show, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk about, again, the week that was for the British Prime Minister, caught between the proverbial EU rock and a Parliament hard place, with a deal that remains widely unpopular. Where does Theresa May go from here?
Well, it was a disastrous week for her, really, and she's emerged from it looking exactly where she was in a funny way at the beginning, and yet even more stuck. It's as if she's in a deep hole and she hasn't stopped digging. She has a deal that she wants to get through the British Parliament and no majority for it. And so even though she's saying I think I can get this deal, essentially the rest of Europe is saying, well, we're not going to change any of the fundamentals, so she's stuck. And now all the conversation is looking at what happens next. And on that score, it's not just that her own Conservative Party is totally divided, but her cabinet seems to be fragmenting in three directions. You've got one side saying, we want no deal. If there's not going to be a deal approved, we'll go out with no deal. You've got a second side saying, no, the only answer is if there's deadlock in Parliament, we should have a second referendum. And the third side is rather feebly and bravely saying, we'll still struggle to support the Prime Minister in her hopeless deal. So it's real deadlock in the party. And the one other thing on the table is, will the Labour Party have a go at a no confidence vote in the whole of Parliament and thereby trigger a new election?
Reminds me of the song "Stuck in the Middle with You." Not sure exactly, which way that this moves, to the right or left. But let's talk more about Theresa May, because as we get closer to March and the day that the UK exits the EU, is this a matter of Theresa May effectively running down the clock? The closer we get to that day, does it put more pressure on MPs to either make their peace with this deal or possibly be held responsible for a hard Brexit with no deal?
I think that is or was her plan, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere because there is a very clear majority in Parliament which says no deal would be a disaster. And they say they will find one way or another of ensuring that the government can't crash out without a deal. There's one event that happened last week which may actually prove to be the most important, and that was last Monday when the European Court of Justice ruled that the British can unilaterally revoke their request to leave the European Union. They can decide all alone, stop Brexit. Now, nobody's really talking about that yet, but it means that as the clock gets closer and closer to midnight, there is a chance that the government can say, this is a nightmare, this is a disaster, we will simply revoke Article 50, by which we plan to leave the European Union, we'll stay in.
That can certainly happen without putting the vote to the people. Some would argue that could also be catastrophic. But let's ask that question of you. What about the possibility of this second referendum? Does that become even more of an option as the clock continues to tick down?
Yes, it does. And I think that's the point that Tony Blair was making last week and causing a furious reaction from Theresa May, who said he was insulting the office of Prime Minister and insulting the democracy of Britain, which I think was for Theresa May, who's normally quite mild, to say things like that about Tony Blair, showed, I think, the degree to which she's on the back foot. But I think this vote in Parliament that I was talking about, if the British are to revoke their request to leave the European Union, if they're to say stop, they do have to pass a new law through Parliament. It would require cross-party support, and I'm pretty certain what it would say is, we will stop the process in order to hold a referendum.
It will be interesting to see what happens with this. Who knows where this goes? Quentin Peel live for us in our London bureau. Thank you again for your time. We'll stay in touch with you.
Thanks for having me.
While Britain waits on its critical vote, Italy's new populist coalition government is deadlocked with the EU over its proposed budget. The dispute is raising questions about whether Italy could eventually follow the United Kingdom out of the EU. Atika Schubert has this report.
A grand entrance for Matteo Salvini, leader of La Lega, the League political party, and Italy's interior minister. Though the soaring score to this thank you rally 6 months after Italy's elections suggests bigger ambitions for the man who has made Italians first his rallying cry.
Now this is a show of force by the League and its party leader Matteo Salvini. Remember, they only won 17% in the national election. They're actually in a coalition with the Five Star Movement. However, since then, under Salvini's leadership, they have surged in popularity. Recent polls place them at 34%. And this rally is a way of consolidating that power.
Salvini has made a name for himself by attacking the EU on immigration and defending Italy's troubled budget. Italian nationalism, he says, will bring Europe back to its, quote, civilized Christian roots. In his speech, he said, someone has betrayed the European dream. We will give blood and strength to the veins of a new Europe, founded on respect, work, economic, and social progress, he said. After Brexit, Britain's imminent departure from the EU, could we see an Italexit? Well, not yet, one of Lega's youth leaders told me. The immediate goal is to gain more seats at European Parliament in next year's elections to constrain the EU first.
We are a very good see on the society, a very good reading of the society, and then we understand that there is a new challenge. It's not only local against the state bureaucracy, but it's the local against the globalism. It's a local against globalization and against the European super state that they want to build.
Not far away, the volunteers at Europe Now, a tiny grassroots movement, are trying to convince Roman residents that Italy needs more Europe, not less. Alarmed at the precedent set by Brexit, every weekend they set up their stall and give out EU flags.
No, the nationalism threats are real. I mean, that's, for instance, we say, that's just rhetoric. It's not. Brexit showed it. Brexit showed it had real effect.
For some of Salvini's supporters, leaving the EU is no longer unthinkable.
Maybe he could. It depends. It depends what happens in the future, but maybe he could. I don't know. I'm not against it anyway. I'm not against Italexit. I'm not against it.
Yeah?
Yes. I was very happy about Brexit as well.
The nationalism that triggered Brexit is similar to the populist wave that Salvini is now steering, but while his power is growing, Italexit is not likely yet. Atika Schubert, CNN, Rome.
Atika Schubert, thank you for that report. Still ahead here on Newsroom, a new poll puts the spotlight on Democrats who want to challenge the U.S. president come 2020. What they're saying about Bernie Sanders and several other possible contenders as Newsroom pushes ahead. Welcome back to CNN Newsroom. I'm George Howell. Here in the United States, ready or not, the 2020 presidential election is getting closer, and Democrats are desperate to find any candidate to beat the U.S. President Donald Trump. A new CNN Des Moines Register Mediacom poll shows which Democrats may be in the running. And to break down those numbers, CNN's Ryan Nobles filed this report.
There's no doubt that we're a long way away from Iowa voters heading to their caucus sites for the first votes of the 2020 presidential campaign. But it's never too early to get a sense of what Iowa voters are thinking. And Democrats there are telling us exactly what their early thoughts are about the 2020 race for president. And what we're seeing is that their thoughts are matching up pretty closely with what we're seeing nationally. Former Vice President Joe Biden leads the field there, 32%. Bernie Sanders, who had a pretty strong performance in 2016, comes in second at 19%. And then the name that jumps off the page, Beto O'Rourke, the congressman from Texas who just lost a narrow race for Senate to Ted Cruz, is in double digits at 11%. And keep in mind, in the last Iowa caucus, many Iowans probably didn't even know who Beto O'Rourke was. Rounding out the field, you have Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren at 5%, Kamala Harris, and the rest of the 20-person field all below 5%. Now, we could easily be in store for a wild card when it comes to this race. And there's some names that we threw into this poll just to see how Iowa voters are thinking about them. Among them, Hillary Clinton and Oprah Winfrey. It's pretty clear Iowa voters would prefer to not see any of them get into this race. 72% of Iowans say that Hillary Clinton would be a distraction. 55% say that Oprah would be a distraction. What is on the minds of Iowans? picking a winner. 54% of Iowa Democrats say that they are going to vote for someone in the caucus who they believe can win the presidency, and that is more important to them than necessarily voting for someone who strictly aligns with their ideology. This is about picking a winner. This is something that Democrats in particular have always cared a great deal about, and that is exactly what they're thinking at this early stage of this campaign. So a long way to go, 14 months before the Iowa caucus, but we are now starting to see what Iowa voters are thinking. Ryan Nobles, CNN, Washington.
It is interesting to see what's ahead there. Ryan, thank you. And now to the oldest sitting justice on the U.S. Supreme Court, in the spotlight with an update on her health. This after more than a month when she fell and broke 3 ribs in her office. She sat down for an interview in New York, and she said that she's feeling much better now. Listen.
How's your health?
It's fine, thank you.
And those ribs you busted?
Almost repaired.
That's good. And have you gone back to your trainer,
Yes.
Brian Stevenson?
Yes. We went back immediately after the fall. We could do legs only. But yesterday, we did the whole routine.
The whole routine?
Yes.
The whole routine that most 35-year-olds can't do.
Yeah, puts 35-year-olds to shame. Despite her accident, Ginsburg never missed a day of arguments at the Supreme Court. Speaks to her resilience. Still ahead in the Pacific Northwest, strong winds and torrential rains knock out electricity.